want you to think about this for a second. What would you do if the lawyer you hired to defend you was the exact same lawyer being accused, right now in court, of failing another client in a massive case? Because that's exactly the situation Joseph and Kendra Duggar are in. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So here's where things get complicated, and honestly, kind of unbelievable. Joseph and Kendra Duggar have hired an attorney to represent them, but that same attorney was also part of Josh Duggar's legal team. And here's the twist. Josh himself just went to court and claimed that his own lawyers were ineffective. Not just ineffective, he's accusing them of violating his constitutional rights, failing to properly investigate, and not defending him the way they should have. So now you've got Joseph and Kendra relying on the very same legal team that Josh is actively criticizing in federal court. Let that sink in. And it doesn't stop there. In the same legal filings, Josh also talks about a lawsuit he filed against the city of Springdale, the Springdale Police Department, Washington County, and several public officials, including the former police chief and the county attorney. What's even more bizarre is that he describes himself as acting like a private investigator for his own family, working on behalf of himself and his sisters. So in his version of events, he's both the person who caused harm and somehow also positioned as someone helping. Now, shifting back to Joseph and Kendra, they've hired Travis to represent them, and their arraignment is set for the 29th. At the same time, there's been almost complete silence publicly from their attorney in Arkansas, Travis Story. Meanwhile, a different attorney connected to Joseph in Florida keeps making statements, even though he doesn't represent Kendra at all. That disconnect alone raises questions. My guess? The case is largely sealed, which means records and details aren't being publicly released right now. But I went through Josh Duggar's filings, over 100 pages in one response and more than 50 in another, and what stands out isn't just the legal arguments, but the mindset behind them. He paints a picture of total failure by his legal team. But here's where it gets interesting. He doesn't directly name the attorneys, but when you look at the case records, you can clearly see who was involved. The appellate team included attorneys from a Missouri-based office, along with Travis Story acting as local counsel in Arkansas. Because the lead attorney wasn't licensed in Arkansas, Travis's role was to handle filings locally, submit motions, participate in parts of the trial, cross-examine some witnesses, and assist with the overall defense strategy. He wasn't leading the case, but he was definitely part of the team. And now Josh is claiming that entire team failed him. At the same time, there's one person funding all of this, Jim Bob Duggar. So on one side, you've got one son telling the court that this legal team was incompetent. On the other side, you've got another son and his wife hiring that same lawyer for a completely different case. That's where things start to look like a setup for history repeating itself. Now, to be clear, I don't personally think Josh's legal team was ineffective. From everything that's been publicly presented, the evidence against him was extremely strong. We're not talking about vague or circumstantial claims. This was tied to devices, timestamps, images, and direct activity. In situations like that, there's only so much a legal team can actually do. And what it looks like here is that Josh is trying to build a path for appeal, because claiming ineffective counsel is one way to try to get relief after a conviction. He argues that the entire process broke down, that his Sixth Amendment rights were violated, and that the defense failed so badly it undermined the fairness of the trial itself. But when you actually break down his claims, a lot of them don't hold up. For example, he says his attorneys allowed the court to exclude evidence that could have supported his defense. That's not how it works. Attorneys don't allow or disallow evidence, the judge makes that decision. Lawyers can argue for something, but they don't control the outcome. He also accuses an expert witness of perjury, claiming false testimony about forensic evidence. But from what's known, the defense did challenge that testimony and even brought in their own expert. It just didn't change the result. Another claim involves what he calls a fabricated confession, saying the government relied on an unrecorded and unverified statement. And then there's his argument about pretrial publicity. He points to a statement from years before the case, even before charges were filed, and says it biased the jury. But legally, pretrial publicity refers to actions that could influence jurors directly before or during a trial, usually from legal teams or media tied to the case. A statement from years earlier doesn't function that way. And from what's understood, those past statements weren't even allowed as evidence during the trial. So the argument doesn't really line up with how the law works. He also raises issues about witness credibility, alleged bias, and even claims a conflict of interest involving the judge. But again, those claims don't seem supported by how the case actually unfolded. At one point, he even tries to connect his criminal case to unrelated civil matters involving his family, which doesn't apply in the way he's suggesting. Now, stepping back to the bigger picture, I'm not saying Travis was ineffective in that case, but I will say this: there's a big difference between attorneys who specialize in criminal law and those who don't. Most lawyers pick a specific area and focus on it. Some try to do everything, but when that happens, they often lack deep expertise in any one area. And that can become a problem in high-stakes cases. What raises more concern here is that Travis is representing both Joseph and Kendra in the same case. In situations involving child welfare or serious allegations, it's very common, and often necessary, for each person to have separate legal representation, because their interests can conflict. One parent might benefit from distancing themselves or taking a different legal strategy, but if one attorney represents both, that flexibility disappears. And ethically, that's where things start to get questionable. Kendra, from what's been described, doesn't appear to have a strong understanding of the legal system or her rights. The court can recommend separate attorneys, but in Arkansas they can't force it. And ultimately, it's the attorney's responsibility to identify and address conflicts of interest. Now, shifting to the situation involving the children. What I'm about to say is based on alleged information, but it's deeply concerning. There are reports that the children showed signs of neglect, issues with behavior, lack of structure, minimal supervision, and in some cases being confined for long periods. One detail that stands out is about a school-age child who was reportedly still in diapers. According to sources, Kendra claimed the child had a developmental disability, but there were no medical records, no diagnosis, and no professional evaluation supporting that claim. It was allegedly a justification used to explain delays that were actually due to lack of care and support. When others questioned it and pushed for medical evaluation, it reportedly came back that there was no disability at all. And even more concerning, there were no steps taken to provide therapy, support, or services that would normally be expected if a child did have special needs. That contradiction is what raises serious concerns. Because if a child truly has a disability, there are systems in place: therapy, interventions, support services. But if none of that is happening, and the claim is still being made, it points to something else entirely. And we're not talking about a toddler here. This is a school-aged child. That's not a minor delay. That's something much more serious. From a legal standpoint, it's surprising that the charges being pursued are relatively minor compared to how severe these allegations sound. Cases like this, when you compare them to others involving extreme neglect, usually carry much heavier consequences. And that's why this situation feels so unsettling. At the end of the day, this case raises a lot of questions, not just about legal strategy, but about accountability, responsibility, and what's really happening behind the scenes. If both parents are being represented together, if the same legal patterns are repeating, and if these allegations are even partially accurate, this could become much bigger than it already is. I want to hear your thoughts on all of this. Drop them in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.